I got introduced to my favourite aeroplane, the Mirage 3. I flew it for 15 years, and it's like every new sports car you ever jump into, it's the first love of your life, so it was fantastic. A great machine, single pilot, although there was some two-seaters that were used for training primarily. And what they did with the two-seater, they took the radar away. The radar sits in the nose cone here, and moved a fuel tank behind the cockpit out, and that's where they put the second seat. So it didn't have the capability of the single-seat aeroplane. We got the aeroplane in 1963. It flew through till 1979, and I flew it from 1973 till 1979. I flew one of the last ones into Woomera as we disposed of the aeroplane. I should say I was probably one of the only person in Australia who flew this aeroplane as a civilian. I was flying it at the same time I was flying the F-18. You find you enjoy about some machinery is the challenge. This aeroplane was a challenge to fly precisely. It was a challenge to do the job we asked of it. We tried to make it a multi-role aeroplane, so we did anti-shipping work, we did air-to-surface work, we did air-to-air, both air combat and air defence. And there is a subtle difference there. It's probably a bit hard for the general public to understand the difference, but air defence is more airspace denial, whereas air combat is actually cleansing the airspace, if you can see the difference there. Yeah. So we did all those roles, and so running different weapons, having to understand each weapon system or each weapon you are employing, and knowing how to employ those weapons to most effect. In those days, we're coming out of the Cold War era or through the Cold War era, and we used to think that we had to evade radar, enemy radars. So we did a lot of low-level flying to avoid the radar. That was demanding. We did some of that at night in bad weather. So in this aeroplane, that was demanding. We never went anywhere as a single ship, basically. It was always in a formation of at least two, mostly four ships, and always around 480 knots speed over the ground. So high speed, highly manoeuvrable, and always in combination with other aeroplanes. So that in itself was just demanding, trying to coordinate those aeroplanes and arrive on target, on time. You know, we had limits on time on target of plus or minus 15 seconds. So fairly demanding mentally. And I guess that was what was so good about the aeroplane, just the challenge of pulling all that together and coming away from a mission feeling, well, I've achieved it and I've done it very well. So it was fantastic. It was both a mental challenge and a physical challenge. Because this one is delta wing, it had extremely sensitive roll stability, if you like. It's not quite the right term, but it would roll rapidly, and it had no real ability to return to wings level. So that was one of the challenges when you're operating at night in weather. You can wind up upside down without realising you've rolled upside down. It would roll at about 360 to 420 degrees per second, so to give you an idea of how delicate it was in roll. Whereas the F-18 being a more straight wing aeroplane, it only rolled about 180 degrees per second, and it had some good dihedral stability and some good roll stability, so it would actually hold wings level without you thinking about it, without you actually making it hold wings level. So that was one of the big differences. But the other big difference between the two aeroplanes was the F-18 had good systems. It had good radios, had plenty of fuel, had two good engines, and it could do the job comfortably. So to a large extent, it was much more of a carefree aeroplane than the Mirage. The F-18 also had a navigation system, so you knew where you were. So you knew how much fuel you had, how much excess fuel you had to go and do the job. Whereas the Mirage didn't have a navigation system as such, so everything was dead reckoning. So there was a lot of mental gymnastics to try and calculate how far away you are from a landing field, how much fuel I got left, how much fuel am I burning, and you're doing those mental gymnastics the whole time in a flight with this thing. And we used to carry big tanks under the wings. We could carry 3 of them, and the aeroplane would go for 4 hours with those tanks on. So, and other times you carry no fuel tanks, and just a clean aeroplane, it would last for about 25 minutes. So quite a big difference. Whereas the F-18, with internal fuel, would go for 2 hours. The other thing with this radar, we used to do stuff low level, looking for targets low level with the radar, and being an old analog type radar, the ground clutter would cloud out your radar image. So we spent a lot of time with the radar control stick manipulating the antenna elevation to try and break out the targets in the side lobes, the radar side lobes. So you can imagine flying around at night at 1,000 feet at 600 knots, trying to work the radar, head down the bucket, working the radar and the antenna elevation, trying to break out a Canberra target or another Mirage or an F111 in the side lobes. A lot of risk and a lot of effort, just staying alive, basically. It was a challenge, as I said. That was the beauty of the aeroplane. That's probably why we all loved it. It was just a big challenge. The tank here, if you could turn the camera around, that's what's called an RPK-10. It's a supersonic tank, so it's good for Mach 1.9. But it also carries 4 500-pound bombs. You can see the weapon stations on the side of it. So that gave the aeroplane quite a good load. With those 2 tanks like that and a centerline tank, you go probably a range or a radius of about 400 miles, nautical miles, so 800 kilometres. You carry 10 weapons, which is not a bad load for an old delta wing aeroplane. Yeah. The way aeroplanes measure airspeed is through what they call a pitot tube. As you can imagine, when you're flying through the air impacts in the tube here through the orifice in the nose. So what we're doing in airspeed measurement is measuring the actual pressure of the air that's being felt by a sensor in this tube. The trouble is, as we go in altitude, the static pressure around us changes. As you know, down at sea level, it's 14 pounds per square inch, or 10, 13 millibars. Up at 40,000 feet, it's only half that. So we've also got to measure the static pressure, that is the outside air pressure. And that's what these little ports here do, because they're in stagnation points on this shape, and they just measure the static pressure. So you take this here measures the dynamic pressure plus the static pressure. You then measure the static pressure, take it away, that leaves your dynamic pressure, which is your airspeed. I mentioned that Mirage has a complex intake. As you get past about Mach 1.2, this little cone here moves forward. The idea is it creates a shock wave on the tip, and it's the idea that as you go faster, the shock wave goes more oblique, and you want to keep the shock wave out of the intake. A little aerodynamic knowledge is all the air behind a shock wave is subsonic, and these early engines couldn't handle supersonic air. So we had to keep the air going down the intake subsonic. So that's what that does. And not only that, see, it gets bigger, it closes down the intake as well. So that reduces the amount of air going through the engine, reduces the drag, therefore you can go faster. And that's all it is. It's not to do with thrust or anything, it's just simply the intake design. Same on the Concorde, same on the F111.